All right, welcome back. We are in this office in a little bit of slightly different configuration. We have Rabbi Finkelstein again, Dr. Holton, myself, Rabbi David, and we have two guests. You want us to just say your names and affiliations?
Affiliations. I'm a Reformed Jew. And I'm Tali, and I'm in 11th grade.
I'm Sam. I guess I'm a Reformed Jew. I've always thought I put the
I
ish
don't
in
think
Jewish,
that's what we're
honestly.
supposed to say.
But it's okay. And I'm 12th grade.
The ish and Jewish.
Yeah. I wrote an essay about that.
Do you say you're in 12th grade?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Well, welcome back. Tali and Sam are real actors, not people. Okay, and they are here for to give us a student perspective, really, on what we're going to discuss today, and to mix things up a bit. So today we're talking about, this is the week of Hod. Hod, H-O-D, is literally splendor. And obviously, as a description of God and one of God's aspects, it's used traditionally to describe God. But Hod also has another association, which is that it's the first part of the word hoda'ah, which means thankfulness, gratitude, etc. And it's become associated with humility because in order to be grateful, in order to be thankful, you have to think of yourself as not being like the end all and be all. So in a certain sense, Hod has become a week where we focus on humility. And humility is really important. It's really interesting. God has God's own form of humility in the sense that we talk about specifically in Sam's 12th grade Jewish thought class, where God sort of is doesn't try to accomplish everything by God's self, but actually like partners with others, namely with humanity, to like make the world a better place, seems to him. And in a certain sense, humility involves on a level like recognizing that you can't do everything of it yourself, that you are not everything, that there's a lot of like other people and forces in the universe that need to help everyone get anywhere really in life. And so God has this quality, and we are, as humanity, and Jews in particular, are supposed to practice this quality of humility as well, coming from Hod, Hoda'ah, gratitude, thankfulness, but also recognizing that that you need help from others. For a better definition and more description of what humility is, we're going to turn it over to Holton, who's going to give us a little bit of the contemporary perspective on humility, and then we'll jump into some discussion.
Great. Well, you just mentioned part of it.
Sorry.
I think no, it's great. I think it's maybe one of the most important parts of it, which is a recognition of our limitations. There's a lot of different ways we can think about it. We've been talking about multiple aspects, but in addition to that recognition of limitations, just an accurate self-assessment, and then on some level, a forgetting of the self. And I don't think we mean that in the same sense as something like altruism. It's not necessarily an other orientation. It's just really sort of an absence of sort of self-oriented, I guess, concepts or experiences like pride and things of that nature. But there's obviously a nuance there. You can overuse humility, right? If you totally and completely forget about yourself, it becomes self-deprecating. And of course, if you underuse it, the problem with that then is just flat-out arrogance. So hopefully we'll draw out some of that spectrum throughout this week's episode. But hopefully these two will do it for it. They're already taking notes, so we're off to a good start, I think.
And obviously, humility as a feature of like Jewish character development, character strength, the aspect of Jewish leaders and figures from ancient times, like the Torah, the Bible, until today, is really interesting. Rabbi?
All right. Well, the Torah doesn't really describe people. I don't know if you've noticed. They don't really describe people with character traits very often. But the Torah does describe Moshe as humble, and it's worth reading. I want to read the pasuk, the verse, because it's an incredible line. This comes from Bamidbar, and it says in Hebrew, "V'ha'ish Moshe anav me'od mikol adam asher al pnei hadama." Now, Moses was very humble, more so than any other person on the face of the earth. This is like pretty effusive praise of Moshe's humility, and I think it's fascinating that we know Moshe was the greatest Jewish leader in the Torah, and if you read that definition one more time, Rabbi David, will you read it?
Yeah, humility is letting one's accomplishments speak for themselves, not regarding oneself as more special than one is. And another way of looking at it is an accurate self-assessment, recognition of limitations, and forgetting of the self.
Okay, so I would say Moshe, especially those last few pieces, he recognizes his limits. There's a certain point where he just falls down on his face when the Jewish people confront him. At the beginning of in the burning bush story, he's like, "Look, I'm not your guy, God." That might be not quite accurate recognition, because God then says, "No, you can do this." But I think Moshe is a fascinating character to think about humility, and just a couple other sort of characters or modern parallels. First, in the Jewish realm, it was said that Rav Soloveitchik, who was one of the greatest teachers of the 20th century, knew Maimonides' code by heart, and that he was also one of the most humble people. So obviously, like, he was aware of his gifts and his skills, and that he was, a world-renowned religious leader and theologian, and that he had a 12-volume, code memorized, which is just insane. And yet he's still humble in the way he carried himself. He wasn't taking up less space than he should have. And the last example I'll say is, without any spoilers, I think Jon Snow is pretty humble in Game of Thrones. And I would just ask, like, who is more like Moshe, Jon Snow or Daenerys?
Well, we know now, I think.
Yeah, I think we know now. I said no spoilers, but
yeah, well, there are no
what we're talking
spoilers.
about either.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones is rated M for mature, so we're not officially endorsing watching it.
Especially not since you had an oneg about it today or something.
That was an optional discussion of the literary themes. Okay, so so one of the things that we were talking about before was that humility, and this comes from Dr. Holton's favorite textbook. Humility is consistently one of the least endorsed strengths across the globe. We have all these character strengths that we've been focusing on, or that we will focus on: appreciation of beauty, perseverance, other ones, and
Fairness.
Okay, those are all great things. And then humility is on this list. But of all the character strengths, it seems like people in our world, our society,
which is...
What, they don't like it?
Well, I don't know, but it's worrisome because when you look at some of the significant correlations, which, again, is, in this this book from Ryan Nemec, I mean, look at those top 5 there, right? Greatest correlations are prudence, fairness, honesty, teamwork, and kindness. So it's unfortunate that this might be one of the least endorsed because it's correlated with some of the absolute best stuff.
Okay, and so that's one of the many reasons we have Sam and Tali here, because Sam and Tali were the essays of winners of the essay competition. Why are you the most humble student on campus? And they were the 2 winners. Really great essays about your most humble qualities, and you're here. You're going to shed a little light. Obviously, it's funny to talk about, but what do you think? What do you think of humility as a character strength in our school, in our culture, in our society? Where do you see it pop up? Where do you see it not pop up? What's your thinking on it?
Do you want to go first? Sure. Well, first, I want to comment on the stuff you brought up about Moses. When I was in 9th grade, I did my Drosh Slam with Rabbi Sean about Moses' speech impediment, which I feel really connects to that. And, Moses, he wasn't he was not an outgoing person at first, and that's not really how his actions seemed, and he had a really hard time taking up his voice and taking up his space. And I think it's really interesting that God, like, I think it says a lot that, like, whatever, if we're going with the story that, like, God chose Moses, that, like, God chose someone who that wasn't, like, he had to work so much harder in order to be able to do what he did. And I feel like that's, I don't know, that's kind of
the person who doesn't want to be the leader is the most appropriate leader.
Something there's
Hashtag Jon Snow.
Hashtag Jon Snow.
Okay, I feel like there's something there.
No, but do you want to say anything about that? Like, about leadership and humility in, like, not just in the Torah, but in general?
I mean,
like, do you agree with that? Do you think that the person who doesn't want to be the leader is probably the most qualified?
I don't know. I don't know that that's always true. Because, I mean, I feel like I'm not always actually the most humble person as a leader. Because, like, I feel like, yeah, like, I know what I'm doing, and, like, I should be doing this, but I also, like, I want to be there, and I feel like I'm good at what I do at least some of the time.
Do you think it speaks to this overuse and underuse spectrum? Like, would you want a leader that's, you know, not so humble that they're self-deprecating, but also,
like, how does that helpful? Like, then they just seem insecure, and it's not...
But you don't want arrogance either.
No.
Well, I think that's why
I think part of the leadership thing that's important is, like, knowing when it's your turn to take, like, when it's your turn. And I think that is, like, someone said something about taking up space. We had a girl talk about that. And just, like, when it's your time to say something and when it's not. When you're
in a group conversation, maybe even like this one, like,
know when you're...
No, like, humility is, like, another way of looking at humility is, like, being aware not just of your own abilities, but the abilities of people around you, stepping in and stepping out of a conversation and making space for other people to talk, even if you have something to say.
Right. Because as a leader, like, the point isn't to show off that you're the best or that you know the most. It's, like, to lead the people to the conclusion or to the answer or whatever they're trying to get to.
Right. And just back to the Moshe example, if Moshe hadn't done what he did, you could see, like, maybe there wouldn't have been somebody else who could have done that, and it would have been a great disservice to people for him to not share those gifts, albeit reluctantly. The Jewish people wouldn't have gotten out of Egypt how they did.
Right.
Sam?
Well, I kind of disagree with both of your initial definitions of humility in general, because I think that how...
you mean the textbook on character
yes,
strengths?
Yes, still.
It's okay, you can do some tofufa.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that humility was kind of best described in a more passive way by how that rabbi who memorized a lot of stuff was described as humble, and that it was about the way he carried himself. And I don't think humility is about what you think of yourself. I think it's about what you portray of yourself. I think it's about knowing when to stop. Doesn't mean you don't have anything to say. It doesn't mean you're not thinking everything. It means you're not showing it. And I think that's the main thing in leadership, where that you need to be able to take a step back, but still have your ideas. Like, I think that Moses would have been a good leader because he knew when to not talk. Like, he knew when to shut up. And it's not just not having anything to say, it's knowing that what you have to say is not the most important thing in the room.
I don't know if you're disagreeing with the definition.
Yeah,
I don't think it's about...
piece.
Because one of the ways of looking at it
it's
is...
forgetting oneself. I don't think it's that. I think it's acknowledging that oneself isn't meant to be there, but still remembering that oneself exists. One is ignorant, one is knowingly taking yourself out of something.
Okay,
so it's like the intention that you're saying is different.
It's about, like, if it's about self-assessment, like the textbook would say, and it's more about forgetting oneself, I don't think humility is forgetting oneself at all. I think it's having the modesty, but having
like
the judgment and the perspective that what you're saying is not the most important thing to be said, and that it doesn't need to be said. Like, if you can have achievements that speak for themselves, that's great, but not all achievements can.
I think this is probably why it's highly correlated with something like prudence, like that decision-making process. When you decide to be humble and step back, when you decide to bring in a little bit of that self-confidence, maybe some borderline arrogance, and step in and kind of make your case or use whatever you bring to the table.
Which would make it less of a characteristic of someone and more of a choice that they make to display. I think that you can be humble, and, like, you can be described as humble, but you can also have humble moments. And that even a humble person who knows when to talk can talk about themselves a lot when no one else has anything to say.
Can we create a scenario without using anyone's names of, let's say, that concretizes what you're saying? So
The
it could
college
be
process.
okay. The college process, really good one. Okay, Sam, end of 12th grade year. You're done with the college process?
Yes.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Tali, end of 11th grade year. Have a lot to look forward to. Okay. The college process, arguably, I assume you raise that, is because, like, in a certain sense, our culture rewards arrogance,
Yeah.
Self-advocacy, self-promotion.
I like
or is it accurate self-assessment?
Right.
So, when you say college process, say a little more about what you mean.
I think that, like, I know some of my closest friends, like my loved ones, they would not lie on college admissions things, but overstate their accomplishments. And I'm like, you did not spend 40 hours doing that thing a week. And I'm like, but I did. I'm like, you didn't though? And I think that overstating that is, it's now seeming like those are the rules of the game, of the college admissions process. You want to do everything. You want to, and even if you don't do everything, you want to show where all your time went. And not knowing where our time went is kind of terrifying. But it can be in an arrogant way when you say what you do, but maybe it's not arrogant because someone's asking. Like, for the college process, it's not like you're just going up to someone and listing your accomplishments. It's like they're asking you for your accomplishments so that you can be considered for something that is hard to get into, and then you're saying them.
And that's also interesting that, like, it asks, like, if we're thinking about this, like, asking for your accomplishments versus, like, the type of person you are. Like, what if I just never really accomplished anything, but I'm a very good person? Like,
How you contribute to the greater
Right.
good versus how you just move yourself forward.
Right.
Yeah.
right. And that's definitely harder to account for.
Like, I think, to me, this comes up every week. Like, I think the easiest sort of metaphor or context or scenario for talking about it is like a sports team. Because the goal of the team is to win, okay?
Right.
Like the goal of a group project or, if you're into dramatic arts, it might be like the goal of the actor in the play is to put on a good show.
Mm-hmm.
But there's all these tiny moments where you, the individual, have to decide, like, do I want to look good myself? Do I care more about that? Or do I care about, like, what is best for the team? So, like,
The problem with All-Stars, we talked about that podcast, right? Shane Battier, and just some people, like, not everyone can score 30 points a game. Some people have to play defense.
and if everyone were
rebounds,
trying to
right.
be the hero of scoring 30 points, the team would lose.
Right. It's about fit.
Right. And
Bringing
that,
what you can bring to the table.
and knowing humility, another way of looking at it, it's like knowing that you're part of a team, part of a whole, and you are not, like, the most important. You're important. You have your skills. You have your weaknesses. You need the help of others, etc. It's actually why I was having an interesting discussion why volleyball is, like, a better team sport in a sense than, like, basketball or soccer, because you literally cannot move the ball to the other side of the net without your fellow
That's very
teammates.
true.
Like, in soccer or basketball, like, someone could do something crazy and amazing by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of why this is so challenging in our culture and society is because it's become maybe, I don't know if you'd say hyper-individual, but increasingly individualistic. And so humility is, it's a really helpful trait, especially when functioning in a group or in a community. But so many parts of our cultural stimuli are pushing us toward just focusing on yourself, which, of course, that doesn't correlate with humility, because
Right.
if everyone's telling you to just talk about yourself, then.
Based on what you said with, like, society becoming increasingly individual, like, I hate to bring up social media because I don't like it, because I actually went off of social media because I just thought it was, like,
You're taking a break.
unhealthy. Yeah,
Good for you.
yeah.
So is
I
Rabbi
just,
David.
Yeah, he's tweeting that right now.
Okay.
I'm texting.
He's texting. He's always
My partner is going to the grocery store to get stuff for dinner,
That's
and
important.
there are a few things we need.
Yeah, I know, because you're having those people over for Shabbat.
That's right.
I was sitting next to you and you were texting in our class meeting.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I think that about. I'm just like during that thing, I was thinking like Sim Sum, and if I. 'Cause I
You
don't
wanna
think
explain a
I've
little?
had-
What's
Oh,
Sim
Sim Sum is the idea that God kind of, or maybe I'm not describing this right, but I
No,
always
you
thought
are.
of it as the idea that God kind of left humanity a little bit so that humanity could grow. Like if
God-
it started as one giant cloud around.
Right. Everything was God, and then in order to make space for, like, the universe of things that are not God, God had to, like, contract into God's self, which is the medieval idea that's really beautiful, and, like, a metaphor for how we interact with others.
I mean, I don't know if this is more of an individualistic thing and humility thing, or if it's more about work ethic. But I was listening to this podcast. It was like a TED thing that about work, and that there was this experiment done where there are all these chickens, and basically,
Did I give you this podcast?
You didn't, but you probably listened to it.
We show in Positive Psych.
Oh.
Margaret Hepburn.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Tell the story though. Yeah.
But there's this person who has a bunch of chickens, and they try to separate the chickens that are most efficient, and then make them like super chickens, and then put them all in a group together so that they can be like this really efficient.
Oh, and
chicken
then they
group.
keep Darwinisming them out.
And like we keep Darwinising them out and taking the most productive chickens that are making the most eggs and putting them all together, and then over the generations, the super
generation or
chickens
something.
just like killed each other because it was so competitive and it was so bad.
Yeah,
I
so it
guess,
gets to a
but-
point where the only way you can achieve success is by suppressing the success of others. Right? And they become these super chickens, and it's sort of a metaphor for businesses and institutions and communities, the college process.
So
and it-
basically, we're getting to like the almost killing each other point.
well, I mean, it's
Yes.
something we were talking about, the last couple of days. We happen to be teaching it in class this week. And the idea, I think, is often that there's only so much success and happiness to go around. And I think that's really, really flawed. And the super chicken is a good articulation of that. The opposite of that is the story of these fireflies in the 1930s. This comes from a great book called Big Potential by Sean Acor. He wrote the book that we use in class. And essentially what happened is this guy's floating down this river in South America. He sees these trees, these mangrove trees along the bank light up in unison. He thinks that's really strange. He goes back home, writes this scientific paper about it, and he's not believed. Why would lightning bugs or fireflies light up in unison? They should be lighting up separately to give themselves the best chance of attracting a female. Well, they find out over subsequent decades of research that when these lightning bugs light up individually, they have about a 3% chance of success. When they light up at the same time, that chance of success goes up to 82. So they're 79% more effective when they are lighting up in sync, right? And I think that speaks kind of like we talked about the problem with All-Stars, is individual traits tend to be non-predictive of team success. What matters is how those traits fit together. And I think that really speaks to knowing your strengths, but knowing your limitations. Being a little confident and arrogant about what you bring to the table, but also understanding, you don't have it all, right? That's one of the famous quotes about character strengths from Dr. Chris Peterson, the late Dr. Chris Peterson, that nobody has them all and nobody lacks them all. It just depends on how they fit with your context and your community and your environment.
Any final thoughts before I give the sort of challenge or exercise for this week?
Yeah. Is it kosher to refer to something from the New Testament?
Yeah.
Yeah? Can we handle that?
We'll
It's
call
about
it
it's
the
about lighting
Christian
it up.
scriptures.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We have some Christian audience members,
No, just
maybe?
during this conversation, I've been thinking about this line that I heard years ago from a colleague. I guess it's a verse. I had to look it up. In Matthew, don't light a lamp and put it under a basket. Let the light give light to everyone in the house. And I've been thinking about that. It's such a hard tension to balance. On the one hand, yeah, we all have our skills and our strengths and things to contribute, and it's incumbent upon each of us to share those and develop those. And on the other hand, you can't all, show that light. It'll be blinding if everyone does it at the same time and destructive ultimately. So, I don't know where the line is between those, but just wanted to bring that in.
Yeah, I think another thing that I was thinking about when Rabbi David first told me about the topic of humility was that there's
After you won the essay.
yes after I wrote that essay. Okay, basically, so there are when we were talking about leadership and success and individual success, some people are out to do things for themselves, and with college, I competed and won this essay contest, or I led people in doing this really good thing or something, I helped people have a conversation about something that was difficult, all these different things that where I feel for me that's kind of the middle ground that I feel I fall in sometimes is I don't really do anything that's only for me. I spend so much of my time trying to better the school or make people have conversations that they need to have, but okay, but then, like, I'm still the one talking, and, like, I'm still the person there, and, like, how... I don't know. That's just, like, I feel like there are, like, sort of three ways to see this. Like,
It's like
three sort of
Holton's favorite
categories.
Jewish quote.
It is my favorite.
You know that one?
Which one?
If I'm not for myself,
Ah.
will be
Of
for
course,
me.
okay.
If I'm only for
Hello,
myself,
hello.
So then, like, is being in the middle category the good category?
Well, the middle
know.
category here is like humility.
Is that the middle category of what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Is this
maybe.
why
I
It's a
don't
I'm
know.
sweet
not
spot.
there?
It's a sweet spot.
I think there's also, we've been talking a lot about words, but we haven't talked as much about actions. I'm thinking about, back to the leadership, there's like all of our politicians who are big on the words.
Yeah.
And then there's people like Mother Teresa and Gandhi who were frankly big on actions and and I would consider them exceedingly humble and, once in a generation kind of leaders.
Potentially, truly, exceedingly humble.
Yeah.
Like maybe they should have.
Maybe they should have spoken a little
Right,
more.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, what do we think about the situation that happens here a lot when people are like, well, like, if I corrected someone for, like, saying something that I think is, like, not inclusive or, like, not nice or whatever, like, in some ways, like, I'm kind of like, oh, well, I'm not like I'm better than you, but, like, I know better than you. Like, how do
Virtue
I know
signaling.
better? How does that play into this?
I don't want to get too far afield because we are running out of
sorry.
time. I do think that an interesting question of humility is when you hear someone say or see someone do something that you have this like knee-jerk reaction that it's you don't like it, either because of the politics or because of the ethics or whatever. Like, what's the role of humility in that situation of like trying to understand better before you sort of correct the person as if you are automatically right and they're automatically wrong just because they think or act differently from how you would think or act. To me, that's like one of the biggest areas of humility that's a challenge on a personal level is if someone says or does something I disagree with, like, can I try to understand better and practice humility by trying to understand rather than like correcting them as if they're wrong and I know everything.
I think there's two pieces to that, and one of them we talk a lot about in RCG. It's inherently difficult. I mean, that's the problem with ignorance. You don't know what you don't know. Sometimes it's hard to be humble because you think you know when you actually do not know, right? But the other, what you just said made me think of it. We were in the Val Sal Hebrew speaker meeting last year, and we were talking about a particular student, and Rabbi Gordon brought up a phrase I had never heard before, which was basically, you correct me if I get this wrong, but you don't use your intellect as a weapon. And what you just said reminded me of that, where even if you think you're right, can you sort of compassionately and patiently and privately maybe correct as opposed to potentially embarrassing somebody publicly.
Right.
That's
Don't
an
blame
aspect
the
of humility.
When I hear someone state something about, let's say, politics that I don't agree with, my ideal moment would be like, let me ask you a few questions to make sure I understand, and then like, here's the way that I think about it, which I think is a little different from yours. What do you think of this?
Mm-hmm.
Which is definitely not how.
Ask
We all-
questions,
yeah.
not make accusations. Yeah.
But I do want to state like something to do or think about this week,
Okay.
which is, like I said at the beginning, the week of Hood, the week of humility, and we're supposed to focus on this character trait. And one of the interventions from the Character Strengths book that I think is really interesting, and we sort of practice it a little bit together here, is to look for exemplars or heroes of humility. And you can talk about them, you could write about them, you can, post to Snapchat about them or whatever it is. But like in the way that we in this moment have celebrated different famous figures who practice humility, like let's do that as a challenge like this week to celebrate humility as a character trait that I think we don't celebrate enough in our society. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Big thanks.
All right.